All right, we're back. It's I was going to say it's back. COMP123, and it's week 13, part 1 of our broadcast. Last week, we kind of were working on a project to transfer a couple of some data. Like where there was 2 forms. It was a multi-form project, right? So we were talking about this one. The first form was a list form, and it didn't really connect to anything, except when you ran it. That's what we kind of did last week. If I chose a province, like Ontario, and I press next, what I could do is I could go back, or I could get help with an about box, right? That tells you the project name and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what we did last week. I wanted to build this with you, so that way when it comes to you doing your final assignment, and we're going to go into that for 1 second. Let's take a look at your final assignment. That's assignment 7. Let's take a look at assignment 7 for a second, please. I want the stuff you have to build. There it is. So with assignment 7, you have these 2 lists, right? So here are the 2 lists. So the way we've kind of, what I'm suggesting you put together is something like this, where you have a movie list, and then you have some kind of image that refers to the, reflects what you kind of selected in the movie list, the title of the movie, the category that's related to it, and the cost, right? So here's a question for you guys. How would you get from the movie list, how would you get the other pieces of information? That's the question. Anybody have an idea? Got the list of movies, right? Oh?
From the database, you gotta make like a detail so when you click it.
I could do that, but there is no database, right? Remember, I'm just generally, I mean, if I don't have a database, how do I get, I mean, I could hard code it. I could put it in like a list of movies, and then all the other stuff, all the other information. I could do that. But what kind of controls can I use? A control that can do that for me, right? Because I got to keep track of, the category, the title, and the cost, right? In order for me to transfer it over here, right? So that's one thing you have to think about. How do we do that? Other things, we talked about a bunch of requirements that you would need. We've been handling some of them. Let's talk about some of the ones we hit from last week, just to help you out. Splash screen, we already know how to do because we talked about that a couple weeks ago, right? Drop-down list we did last week. We did a group box last week, right? So we know how to do these 3 things, right? How to make things read-only. Picture boxes we've done one time, and I think I want to try again. I want to see if we can do another example of a picture box today. How do we change the control box so that there's no, so there's certain properties that are removed. We've kind of done that already. The print menu selection brings up a message box. We know how to do message boxes, right? Because we've talked about that. About box, we've done that. Different text boxes. Hidden labels. When you think about a hidden label or a hidden anything like that and making it come back up and so on, those things we've kind of handled a bunch of ways. We can make things, the visibility of things invisible. So really, at the end of the day, you should have, at this point, everything you need to do your assignment number 7. So what do I want to do with you guys today? I want to help. That's what the answer is. I want to help you guys out with questions you guys have about certain controls and so on, right? And let's talk about some of the controls we haven't hit. Like, for example, radio buttons. How do we do radio buttons? How do I do combo boxes? What's the difference between a combo box and a list box, and so on? Let's talk about those things. So if we go over the list of controls we haven't hit right now, and these are the most common ones we're going to hit, right? Checkbox we haven't done, so we can talk about a checkbox. What we can check on or off, right? A checked list box. That's a list box with checkboxes next to it, right? So you can make multiple selections. A combo box, right? Which is something different. A date picker, right? A date picker. And there's other ones that we can also hit. For example, things like radio buttons. How do I do radio buttons, and how do I group those together? Things that I don't want you to do, like within things, like for example, web browser. Chances are I won't need to do a little web browser within this little app that we're building, right? Okay, so if we pick the province, that's what we're doing. We've got a province. We pick the province we go over from your province list, right? We can also use the same example here, right? If, for example, I wanted to, instead of a province, this list box, right? Is there something else I can use here instead of a list box to do a very similar job, right? And the answer is yes, I could use a combo box, right? A combo box does something similar to what a list box control does, okay? Here's something else. There's something called a list view. That's kind of new within versions 4.6.1, right? It's kind of later. What a list view is, it displays a collection of items in one of 5 different views, right? Let's try one of those a little bit. So we'll try those out too. So here's our menu. We did our menu. Anyone have any problems with menus? Pretty straightforward, right? So that's kind of, you know, some of the stuff we can do. Like, for example, our province has a selection, and if for example, if I want to put in something like, you know, are you a Canadian resident or not, like something like an option, like a yes or no question, that would be a good solution for a checkbox, or a radio button, right? Radio buttons are good for either or kind of questions. Like, for example, you know, you want to make a questionnaire, right? Kind of an online questionnaire with, or some kind of app that has a questionnaire built in, or some kind of series of questions to kind of detail what you're building, right? So those are the kind of things you can do. Here's something that I want to build with you. I want to build, whoever plays any kind of role-playing games or games of any kind, you guys play role-playing games? Yeah? I want to build a character generator with you over the next couple days, right? So I want to build like an old D&D character generator, right? So I want to make, that's got to be very simple because we don't have a lot of time, right? But there's going to be a reason for this. And the reason for that is when we do a character generator, right? I want to kind of generate some ability scores, right? And do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. Anyone not know what a character generator is? That would be very bad, right? If I'm talking about something and you don't know. So imagine you're playing a tabletop game, and you're going to make some kind of utility that it's going to help you, you know, generate some random non-player characters or random things that, you know, people are going to use in the game. So we can use that to produce very simple a multi-form application. Let's do that. So I'm going to say File. I'm going to go close my solution. This is from lesson 12. Let's do lesson 13. So new project. And let's build this out. In previous years, I actually used the small character generator as part of an exam, right? So I kind of said, hey, with this exam, you know, build this character generator. By the way, don't be surprised if something like this comes back onto an exam. Like, for example, next week where we have our exam on Friday, that's the final exam we're going to have, right? 10:30 to 12:30, we'll have a little in-house exam. It shouldn't last more than 90 minutes. It's going to be all about Windows forms. And you're going to have to build something, right? So please practice your Windows forms so that you can do well on your exam. All right, so I'm building a new window form application, and I'm going to call it COMP123 Summer 2016 Lesson 13, right? Because that's what we're doing today. Notice that I also have my create directory for solution and create new Git repository. Some people have asked, I don't know why I'm not going to Git repository. Make sure those two things are checked so you align with what I'm doing. Press OK. I got my form. Now, if I'm going to generate multiple abilities, and there's a reason for my madness. Why am I telling you to build a character generator? 2 reasons. 1, we only want to generate random abilities right now. And 2, we want to take those random abilities, right, as an example, with some additional boxes and create almost like the final form, right? So we have almost like our generator form. We'll have 2 forms, and then we'll have our final form, which actually takes all the stuff that we generate and kind of put them together. All right, so let's think about this. Let's plot this out a little bit. So if I was going to open my form up a little bit, I need several boxes, right? When I press the roll button, this is what I want to do. So here's the, if I was going to tell you the Agile user story. Who knows about Agile? Anybody work with Agile project management? Okay, if you do, you make a user story. You kind of make a scenario of what a user should be doing. So here's the user story. A user should be able to click, you know, the generate button, and it'll generate all of his abilities and randomly assign a class, right, and a gender. We'll talk about that. Random assignment of a class and a gender for him to, you know, create a character, right? Or here's another one. Let's just randomly generate abilities. How about that first? So if I was going to say that's the first user story, right? So I have to decide what the abilities are. If we're going to go with classic Dungeons and Dragons, right? And you know, we're going to have several. We're going to have different abilities. There's 6 abilities usually for Dungeons and Dragons. Let's put those on. So I need a label. Yes. Oh, he's good. He's good. Thank you, sir. Here and charisma, right? Here's the thing that I want you guys to think about as well. How will you? Let me just undo that. How will you, when it comes to making abilities, shouldn't there be an ability section, right? For example, I might want to surround my abilities within some kind of container, like a group box. You can also think about it as using a panel. Panels are different than group boxes. And you can also use some kind of tab control. There's lots of different containers here that we can use. We're going to make it a group box. I'm going to put a group box onto the control, onto the form. This group box is going to be the ability group box, right? So we'll call it ability group box, right? And then we're going to say abilities down here. So basically all the group box does, remember, is it kind of positions, it kind of creates a rectangle, right, of where I'm going to put all of my abilities inside. So this is where all my abilities are going to be listed, right? Again, I can change the font of this to make it slightly larger. You don't make the title too large, because what'll end up happening is it might be too large for what you're doing. So let's make it 12 max. We'll use Lucida Sans again. You can use whatever you like. You can see that that's a little bit more legible, right? And so in there, what I want to do, I'm going to drag and drop a series of labels and text boxes, right? So here's my label, right? So I'll put it right there, the first one. And this will be, like you said, strength, right? My strength label. So this will be my strength label. And by the way, I could put strength label or STR label because it's kind of makes both things make sense. Let's just go down here and pull it and just say strength. By the way, there's an analog for this if you're going to do a web form. Notice that my default size becomes 12 inside this box. So I made it 12 for this box, so it kept the style for my strength as an example to 12. The only thing I would like to do is make this bold. So I'm going to call this demi bold for strength, and I'm going to pass in. Let's say, for example, I want my whole form to be white instead of this really weird, system gray. I'm going to change the back color of the form. Here's my background of my form. Instead of control, I'm going to go to web, and it's going to be white. So that's my whole form. Classic, colors here, right? And let's go and drop in a text box. Here we go, text box. I'm going to drag this underneath the strength, right? Now, why text box? I could make it another label, but I like the look and feel of a text box. I don't need it to be too big. It is 12 points, right? So I can see what it is. I may have to reduce the size of this just slightly because I only need a number in there, right? So I'm going to put these, text boxes one after the other. So this is going to be the strength text box. Okay. We'll call this, again, everything is good. One thing we know is I don't want you to modify your abilities, right? So when you roll your abilities, it's got to be read-only, right? So that's got to be true. Make sure that this doesn't change, right? And the other thing that I want is for the background color, just to be example, it won't be control anymore. It'll be like white again, right? So that you can see this. It'll look just like this. Little box with some. So read-only is true, right? And what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this because, and again, there's different ways of writing this thing if I was going to copy it. And just from a reference, for people who don't know Dungeons and Dragons, I guess I have to bring this up too because that won't be fair. Wizards of the Coast are the people that kind of create it. It used to be. Now it's Wizards of the Coast. Okay? So Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons and Dragons now. They're the people that own it. And if you wanted to, not that I want to advertise for them, but Dungeons and Dragons is this popular tabletop game that people play. And I want to generate some abilities for this thing. right? So if I was going to say, you know, D&D abilities or attributes, there's different things you can actually go into and find out what D&D is and all this kind of stuff. They also give you some free downloads if you want to look at D&D products, right? So they have, you know, different options for tabletop games, you know, and so on. They all have digital resources already for these things, lots of good stuff. And it didn't used to be this way. We only had books back in the day. So, I mean, if I was going to say D&D abilities, right? Then it's going to give you a list of D&D abilities that we want to use. And this is kind of strength, dexterity, like I said, constitution. You're talking about that. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So those are the 6 ability scores, right, that we're going to use. And the 5 of the ones we're going to use on our sheet, right? So we're going to say kind of grab those, copy, paste, right? And I'm just going to copy them for now, just so that we have 6 of them. So far, they just say strength, but we'll see how we'll have to realign our box right here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, a couple more, 5, 6, all the way to the bottom. So 5 and 6, and now we're running out of space, so we're going to have to put it so that it fits. So let's just do one of these, make it a little bit larger, and you're going to have to make it so that these are your abilities. Now they're not aligned, right? But let's fix it up and then I'll align it later. So this would be, and again, if I was going to go back, dexterity is the next one. So dexterity label. Dexterity is the measure of how agile a character is, right? Which would say dexterity. It also adds into things like the ability for them to be hit, and it also helps with things like initiative in the game, if I remember correctly. Constitution. Constitution is like your stamina, the ability for you, how long you can do certain things, and how you can resist. How you can resist things like poisons and bad things from happening. Constitution. Long, big words. By the way, sometimes people we put shorthands, like for example STR for strength, DX or Dex, and so on. We're just going to put the long versions here so everyone knows what they are. For people who aren't Dungeons and Dragons players. Dexterity, Xbox. Okay, Constitution text box. There we go. This would be, I believe it's intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So this is intelligence, label. And bear with me while I just label everything properly. All I'm doing here is doing what you would normally do, right? That'll be a wisdom label. Again, you might have similar games out there nowadays that use the whole Dungeons and Dragons style of ability scores. Actually, it's really, at the end of the day, Dungeons and Dragons is like kind of like the originator of all role-playing games back in the day, right? So all the games we play today that are role-playing like, I mean, I think Dungeons and Dragons probably be the most, I would say, the popular origin of most games. If you played Dungeons and Dragons before, then when you played a digital game, like, I don't know, something even like a Fallout, Fallout 4, Fallout 3, whatever kind of games you have right now, and then a bunch of other games, using a couple of games just that are kind of recent. Again, you have abilities, and those abilities give your character some difficulty, or they aid when it comes to him making certain decisions or having interaction with the game with other players and so on, right? Charisma label. Almost done. Should be Charisma text box. I'm just trying to make this a little more fun. Charisma text box. The code behind it is actually a lot more challenging than it looks, but we'll talk about this in a second. So I'm just going to kind of take all these ones here. Remember what you can do if you want to align everything together, you can take all those, and if you look at the align controls up here, right, you can see that I can align to the left, so they're all aligned left by this little control up here, right? If you look at this as well, make same width. If I want to make all the controls the same width, here is make same height. So if I want to make all the same height controls, and I can make them the same size. If I want to distribute them, like for example, make my vertical spacing equal, I could do that too by clicking this button. That's all the vertical spacing, it's all equal. So it makes it look a little nicer, right? So now you got everything kind of aligned. I can probably drop back this box a little bit. So that's what it looks like. And in fact, if this is my abilities, without anything else, I can probably make this a little thinner too. Here's the good thing about group boxes. We talked about group boxes last week. If I want to take this whole thing and move it around now, I can do that to align stuff because it's part of the group box. It's a container, right? I can do that. Let's change the name of the form. One thing we haven't done is called this the generator form. So let's rename the form, right-click, and rename this form generator form. There we go. I'm just going to rename this form. We're going to copy, when it comes to the form itself, we're going to rename the title bar of the form to generator. So the text of the form should be called generator. There we go. All right, and I want to put some simple functionality. So when I click on this button, I'm going to drag a button onto the form. There we are. And let's make this button a little bigger. So I choose a big font so you guys can see it. Maybe 14 pixels. Let's hit a sans again. There we go. I'll make this the button. All right, and when we click on this button, which is going to have this generate button, that's what it's going to be called, generate button. Please practice with me because it'll make it easier for your exam. Please don't just watch. That would be bad because then it's not going to help you. So we'll call this generate. Okay, so here's the user story. When I click the generate button right now, right, it's going to generate 6 random abilities, right? D&D uses a system where each ability is ranged from 3 to 18, right? And the way you would roll that is you take 3 D6, 3 6-sided dice, roll them, and then add them together, right? There's also other systems that allow you to a point generation system where you assign points, but we're not going to do that one. We do random numbers, right? Here's the thing. Some systems allow you to do things like, as an example, use 4 dice and drop the lowest one, right? So use 4 dice, you drop the lowest one, right? So 3 dice is okay, but how do I do 4 dice, drop the lowest one? I want to be able to do that. So I want to do 4d6. That's the system that I'm calling it, right? So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if I kind of look up what 4d6 is, if I go 4d6, drop lowest average, right? There you go. That's what I'm looking at. So 4d6 drop the lowest, right? I actually have a system about what the average looks like. If you look at the 3d6 has a bell curve that looks like this, and 4d6 pushes everything to the right a little bit. So it makes the abilities a little bit nicer. That's all it does. Because you drop the lowest die, right? So why do we do this? Back in the day, we used to do 4d6 because it was too difficult to play 3d6. 3d6 was like you made characters. Some of them had 9s, you know, which was pretty low. So first we'll do 3d6, an ability generator that does 3d6, which means we need a method to do that. We're going to call a method, and each time we do it, we're going to do it for each of the abilities, right? So 6 times, right? And then after we call the method 6 times for the abilities, by the way, if you think of another way of doing it, please pipe up, right? Because there are many ways to do the same thing here, right? To make it more efficient. But basically, it's going to be based on this ability to click. So let's click on generate, and it's going to produce a stub for me. Here we go, right? And I want to produce a random number. All right. So when I click on the generate button, it's going to kind of generate random numbers. Remember how we did the random numbers? We had a random class, right? Who remembers random numbers? What should I do? How do I create a random object? Because remember, whenever I do random numbers, it's not really random. It's a random seed, right? It's a random pseudo-random numbers, right? So if you guys don't remember how to do that, I recommend in the class we create a private instance object, right? That's what we're going to have, which is a random. So we're going to say random. We'll call this thing like random, lowercase random, like this. We're going to list it up here, right? And then inside, when I generate my document, so on load, let me go back to load. So I'm going to double click on the form. So on my form load, that's where I'm going to kind of initialize stuff, right? I want to say that my random is equal to a new random object, right? That gives me a new random object. And that's something that's part of, I gotta do one of these too. Because it's private, I probably should rename this to _random, which I will do, rename _random, right? Because remember, we want to make random objects, anything like that, anything private like that. Okay, so I've got my random object, and then I can go random.next, right? So if I want to get an ability score, my generator, right, when I click on the buttons, I'm going to say, when I click my buttons, I'm going to generate my abilities, right? So I want to make another method in here, private method, returns void, called generate abilities. I'm breaking it out like this because it's better than having it in my, here we go, generate abilities. All right. So I'm going to call, when I click the button, I'm going to call this generate abilities, right? So I'm going to say generate abilities. I'm going to call that method. So inside my method, I'm going to do other things here in my generate button .click as well. But for now, generate abilities is one thing I'm going to do. So how do I generate my 6 abilities? And the only thing I want to do is generate them, but I want them to be saved, right? Yeah, because if I don't save my abilities, right? There's 2 ways to save them. One, I can save the number inside the text boxes and not worry about it, right? I could do that. And the other thing I want to do when I generate my abilities is eventually I want to be able to carry them forward into my next form, right? Just a moment. All right, so I want to carry this forward. So there's a couple ways to do this. But for now, let's think about my generate abilities is going to call another method, right? Another method, which is going to be the random number method. That's going to be at the 4d6, right? We're going to call this another private void, our roll method, right? And we're going to make this a little different in a second. I've made it capital R for now. We're going to go and rename these things later on. So my roll method is going to roll 3 dice for now and add them together, right? So how do I do that? Well, I got to have a variable for that for my 3 dice. I could use, oh boy, a list of numbers, right? Which I recommend, by the way. Let's do that. So I'll call a random list. I'll say, so list of type int, because they're going to be integers, 32. That's what the type of list I'm going to make, which is my list of numbers. So we're going to call this numbers, right? Which is a new list int 32. Okay. And how come it gives me this issue? Because int 32 doesn't exist. It has to be capital I. There we go. All right. So now I've got this list. Whenever I do this, so I generated this new create new empty list, right? Remember, list is just right now a container object, right? A list also has lots of really cool properties. We've talked about this a bunch of times, right? So why am I using a list? Because I can use the sorted value of a list. So if I want to generate 3 dice, 4 dice, 6 dice, 10 dice, and drop, all the lowest numbers, I can do that, right? So the first thing I want to do is create a list of numbers. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm just going to call the list numbers, right? And then what I want to do is for each number, I want to add, right? For each one I want to roll, I want to do a for loop that adds a new number to the list. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Remember, this is only inside the roll method, which means every time I call the roll method, it generates a new list. Okay, the old list disappears when I'm done with the roll method. Okay, let's try this out. So again, I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say for loop. I'm not using a for each because I don't have anything in the list yet. So for each isn't the right one. And instead of, I'm going to just use the count as an example, right? And count's going to start at 0, and I'm going to go less than, for now, 3, because I want to do 3 numbers, 3 dice, right? And what I want to do in the list to generate this is I want to say numbers.add, right? Right? Dot add, and inside the add, I want to add something to the numbers, to the list of numbers. I want to make that random number happen, right? Remember, it's going to be a D6. How do I do a 6-sided die? I'm going to use, the random not next, right? Who remembers what to do with random? I got my random number seed, so I can say something like this. Then let's go random, right? Dot next, and then I'm going to have to specify something like, what it does, and then from 1, to the maximum value, but not including the maximum value, right? Exclusive upper limit, so it can't be 6. I could make it 0 to 5 or 0 to 6 plus 1. That's fine too, right? If you're really cranky about it, you can do something like 0 to 6, and then you can add 1 to it after, like this. You can say something like plus 1. Okay, so that's the number that I'm going to add in. This is my number that I'm going to add into my to my numbers, and I'm going to do that 3 times. Right? Okay, now what I want to do is at the end, I want to kind of create a sum, right? The sum of the numbers, right? And I want to add up all the numbers in my list, right? And is there a way of doing that? So can I do something like numbers? And then let's see what else you can do here. I have add range. What does add range do? It says add the elements of the specified collection to the end of the list. Okay, I could do that. So adds the elements of the specified collection to the end of the list. That sounds like the right thing to do, right? So let's do that. So add range. And it says an int collection, right? We know which ones that is, right? So I said, well, an int add range adds the elements of the specified collection to the end of the list. That's not what I want. That's just going to end it to the end of the list. Arg, that's not what I want. What else? As read only, average. Average says computes the average of a sequence of int values that are obtained by invoking a transform function on each element of the input sequence, blah, blah. That's not cool. Clear the list. Contains count. I can count members of the list. I can do that. Equals. Equals just compares 2 lists, right? I can do that. Exist, find all, find last, first, get range, right? Insert objects, join objects, last objects, max. Here's something. Max says returns the maximum value in a sequence of int values. Right? So that's neat. I might be able to use min. That will be able to drop that value, right? Okay, so I can do that. Order by, I can do that. Remove, reverse, select, skip, sort, and sum. And sum says computes the sum of the sequence of int values. Okay, so let's do that. So sum. And then it says, okay, computes the sum of the sequence of int values. And it's looking for, right, numbers.sum. But it's going to return, right? Look what it's going to return. It's going to return something, right? There's some options here. Let's take a look at the different options, right? So the first one is to put nothing in there. The second one is it basically says computes the sum of the sequence of nullable decimal values. Well, we don't want that, right? Here's decimals, doubles, floats. I don't want that. How do I make a list? How do I compute the list of numbers? I could run through a for loop again, right? Or what I could do is while I'm generating the numbers, this is the easy way to do it, create a sum, right, that I'm going to return, right? So something like this. So I have the result, which is integer, which is a number, right? So I'm going to say int, right, result. We're going to start that off as equal to 0. I could do this. What I'm going to say inside here is result plus equals to, right, this current number, whatever the current number is, right? So the number that I'm adding, well, if I'm doing this, I'm doing it all in one line, I may want to do the, new number. So I could say something like, again, an integer, which is the new number, or we'll call it generated number. How about that? Generated number, right, is equal to, and we'll take this random blah, blah, blah part, this part here, cut it. Try that again. Cut it. I'm just going to try and solution with you here. So there's different ways of doing the same thing, right? So if you guys have some suggestions, you can always let me know as well. Generated number, we'll put that in there. And then we're going to add the generated number onto the result. And then at the end, we're going to return the result. Right? Return the result. But there is no return. Why? Because we said void. We're going to return an integer. We'll say an integer 32. Okay, clear. So this roll button generates 3 numbers, adds them together, and returns the result. That's what it does, right? Every time my generated abilities, it should kind of generate an ability for each of my abilities, right? So this is something I need to do that's kind of long, right? I need to do something like this. In my generated abilities, I got to do something like, so I have my strength. So strength textbox.text is equal to, again, here's how it works, right? This dot roll, right? This dot roll to string, because we're going to convert whatever I get to string, and we have to actually put these brackets in there to make it go. This dot roll to string, right? So we're going to take the roll and we're going to convert it to string, and we're going to assign it to the text box. And let's do that a bunch of times because we have our strength text box. We'll do it in order. So we'll say copy. There's more efficient ways to do this. I'm just going to show you the long way because it's good to know this as well. Strength, dexterity, text box, and again constitution, text box. And this one will be intelligence, text box, wisdom, and charisma. All right, so that should do it actually. But it only generates, oops, I'm gonna put a semicolon there. It only generates a number from 1 to 6 3 times, right? So that means we'll get a rough number between 3 and 18, and the average will be 9, right? Because if I take 3 dice together, if the average of each dice is around 3, add them together, right? You'll get 9. So that's the average. The average roll you'll get right now is 9 every time, right? If you get a real high number like 18, you'll be happy, right? Because that's like crazy impossible. It's really hard. The only way you can get 18 is 3 6s, right? From a combination perspective, right? You can get, and the most other one that's really difficult is a 3. That's really hard. Like on the low end, getting a 3 is it's really hard. It's like as hard as getting an 18. All right, who's with me on this one? Because I mean, again, I'm kind of doing this with you guys to show you, some kind of structure. One way you could do this. Is this the only way? No, it's not. There's always more than one way to write code, right? You just got to figure out what's the most efficient way. And here, what I'm doing in this little function, my roll function, I'm creating a list, right? The list is going to be, I'm adding the roll to the list, and then I'm generating the result. Why a list? Because I can play with a list, like I said. And right now, all I'm doing instead of using a list method, all I'm doing is I'm getting the numbers, and I'm dropping. I'm not dropping anything. I'm only doing 3 dice. We're going to get back to how to do this later on. How to make 46. All right, cool. Let's run this thing and test it. So run it. Oh, one thing I don't like is I don't like how Windows default location starts off. We're going to change that to center screen, right? And let's play. Okay, cool. So I click generate, and then I get numbers, right? You should get this too. Do you all get this? So if I generate again, every time I click the generate button, I'm getting random numbers that I got in my boxes, right? And I'm getting some pretty bad characters, like 9s and 8s. You know, it's 7s. That's a pretty bad character. You don't want to get that. Here's what. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. What a great character that is, right? So 10, 18 for dexterity. That's a good, you know, roguelike kind of character, right? Constitution of 10, pretty smart, right? Oh, maybe a rogue wizard kind of character, or even maybe a wizard type, right? With that kind of stuff. Man, if you allow people to move abilities around, wait a minute. What if I can allow to move 2 abilities around, swap an ability with another ability? If you could swap one ability as one of your things, that'd be kind of a cool thing to, you know, as part of your rules, right? So maybe we'll sit down and say, we'll do an ability swap. We'll try and get that logic going too. So how do I swap, you know, the numbers from 2 abilities? It's pretty easy, but you got to figure out, you can only swap 2, right? So choose 2 abilities and they swap them out, right? How do I do that? There's different ways of doing that, by the way. There's ways of doing it with drag and drop. So I can drop one ability onto the other and they swap, right? That's kind of a special effect. Or the other one would be is to have some kind of choose one ability and choose a second ability and 2 little drop-down boxes, right? And when you click on swap, it swaps those 2 abilities, right? And maybe you can do that over and over again so you can set up your character the way you like, right? So instead of you having it like this, you just have a little swap area over here that does that kind of functionality before you go next and take your and kind of keep your abilities, right? Or whatever you want. This is a cool character though, man. That's like great stuff. Hey, here's something. I don't like the fact that my character abilities are kind of on the left. I want them in the middle, right? Because that looks a little nicer. Let's fix that up. So I want to select all of them. Remember how we did this last time? You can select more than one related control. And on the right, when I go to text alignment, so here's text align, I can use text align center to center the text. So when I write this again, so I just went over here from a properties perspective, but I touched all of these, right? If I press play and I click generate, now they're all centered. That's not that great of a character, right? So, but you can see that I'm not getting great results. I'm getting some results that are lower, and I want to have a more heroic character. So now I want to implement my 4d6 method. 4d6, that means, again, I roll 4 dice, drop the lowest one. How do I do that? And that's going to require us to refactor our roll method. We have some of it already. We have a list. Now we're going to generate 4 abilities. And we're not going to add the result right now. This is not what we're going to do. This is not, we can't add the result as we're adding stuff, right? What we want to kind of do is drop the lowest one, right? So that's the first thing we want to do is, so generate 4 dice. So we'll say this, roll 4 dice. That's what we're going to do here. And then underneath here, we're going to say, drop the lowest one, the lowest die. How do we drop the lowest die? Well, we have that, right? We can go something like, because it's a list, we can say, well, numbers, right, dot remove, right? I want to remove an item, whatever the item is. The item that we're going to remove is the one that's the lowest, right? So we're going to say where numbers dot min, minimum number, right? See if that works out. Can I remove one? Okay. And then what I want to do is I want to create the result by going through the numbers again, doing a for each loop. Let's just say this is the long way. So add the numbers to the result, right? So we're going to say for each, right? For each, again, it's going to be a number in numbers, the numbers collection, right? For each number in numbers, we're going to say is result plus equals to number, And this one will be obviously instead of a var. Now, the reason why we're using var is because it's a collection of objects, right? So let's save this. So how does this work, right? Because number is a variable, an integer, right? So this is what this would be. This would just be an integer, right? So int. That's a kind of a weird way of doing it, right? So we kind of do a loop here, and then I do another loop down here. And we're also getting the min. Does this do what it's supposed to do, this one here, right? And then we want the result, right? So here's something that I want to do. I want to be able to debug this a little bit. So knowing that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do a debug .writeLine. Remember, in order to make us a debug.writeLine, I want a debug.writeLine that generated number every single time. In order for us to make that work, remember, debug requires another library, right, in our form. So we're going to say control dot, and we're going to use using system.diagnostics to add the debug capability in our form, all right? So this, what it's going to do is going to generate the number, and then it's going to spit out the result. Let's see if this works. And let's see if we have a problem here with our remove numbers min. Let's see if that works. Let's run it. Okay, generate. Oh man, that took a long time. Let's take and see. Let's look and see what we got in our output here for a second. All right, program output. Take a look. 2524, right? 2524. That's 2 is the first ability, right? So if you think about what this does, 2 and 5. Well, the lowest number is 2, so it's 5 and 2, 7 and 4 is 11. So the first ability then should be an 11. There we go. Okay, let's look at the next ones. 1, 6, 1, 3. The lowest number is a 1. So 6 and 3 is 9 and 1 is 10. So this next one should be 10. So this works, right? Let's keep going just to make sure our test is correct, right? 3, 3, 1, 2. That's pretty low. 6 and 2 is 8. So even with this little thing, you can see that I'm taking the 4 dice and I'm dropping the lowest one, and I'm using that to calculate this. So if I generate it again, you can see that I get this number, 15, 11, 14, 9. The numbers are slightly higher. Like I said, they're more heroic, right? Because I've just shifted my averages to the right. So instead of getting a 9, I'm getting an 11.5 approximately as the average roll, right? So the average ability score is going to be about an 11.5. When I say 11.5, it's because sometimes you're going to have 11, sometimes you're going to have a 12 on average, right? They're equal. So 11s and 12s, what I should see here more often than not, and very few 9s, right? If I generate it again, see 11s and 12s, lots of 11s and 12s, and then maybe a 9 and some other abilities appear. It's not bad. So kind of bell curves it a little to the right, right? And you're going to get characters that are more sustainable, right, in the game. All right, let's stop this for a second. We can take out the debugging information now because we know that it works, right? Is there a way that you can refactor this to make it more efficient that you can think of? So remember, I add stuff onto the result, right? I mean, I could make it a single line, right? A for loop. I'm doing a for loop with 4 dice, generates 4 dice, right? Runs through, removes the lowest die from the list. That's what I'm doing here, right? And then I run through another for each loop, and it generates the result, right? Is there a way of generating the result without me going through a for loop? Is there something that's built into the list class that we can use? That's the first thing on my mind that I would think of. So let's see if I can do that. So we'll say list methods, C#. If I go to list class methods, that's okay. That's this the one, or this one, doesn't matter. So here's all the list methods. Add, we know the add range. Right, what I want to do is kind of do a sum. That's what I saw. There was a summary, a sum function. Right, so sort, that kind of stuff. To array, explicit interface, but there's average, distinct. And I'm looking for this because I want to do the ability for us to sum up the numbers in a list. Here it is. So overloaded computes the sum of the sequence of decimal values that are obtained by invoking a transform function in each element of the input sequence. Meh, I don't want that. Where I have a sum, which is of type of type whatever the sum I want. So an integer sum, as an example, where I have the function. The T stands for the type, a generic type, right? Something with an integer 32. As an example, there's the function of nullable, double. Okay. Computes the sum of sequence of nullable values that are obtained by invoking a transform function. Let's see how this works. If you click on there, let's see if there's an example that we can use, right? Okay, so here's our list, a package list, right? And what we want to do is we want to look at each new package, right? And we're going to do a packages.sum, and we're going to pass in each package, the weight of each package, right? So package-weight. So this is what this is called is a Lambda expression that we use here to return the package weight of each package and then add it to the sum and create the total weight. So in one line, you're really doing what I'm doing in 3, right? Where package is equal to the packages method. Notice that there isn't any, I'm looking at the packages object and I'm creating something called package. It's almost like a way of doing this thing. This is what I want to do. This is kind of stuff that I want to do. I want to do it in one line. So what does a Lambda expression look like? Guys, you need to pay attention for this one because I'm going to do it and then you're going to lose it, right? So what I'm really saying here is this. Return a package, each package object, each object that has package.weight. In this particular case, package refers to the package collection. And each package collection has a weight value, a weight object, right? So how would I do that for myself? Well, all I care about is returning a number. So actually, what I really want to do is I'm going to say package.sum, or in our case, numbers.sum numbers, right? That's all I'm doing. I'm just getting the number of whatever the package is, right? So see if that can work. That's kind of a weird thing. I don't have another property. I don't have a company. If I wanted to kind of add up the strings, I could have said, package.company. Well, there is no object. The package objects are all, in this particular case, a list of packages. We just have a list of numbers. So it's even easier for us. So instead of doing this, I'm just going to comment this out. So see if we can return the same stuff. So I'm going to kind of do one of these. I want to see if I can refactor this in one line. So how would I do that? Okay. So I want the result then be equal, just for now, because I don't want to kill the last line there. My result's going to equal to numbers.sum of a number, right? Here's the problem, where my number does not exist in the current context, right? So remember, what we want to do is we kind of return, if we want to do this, the number, right? Okay, this is kind of weird notation here. What I'm saying is, hey, look in the numbers, and for every number, return it. That's all I'm saying. So when I do that, sum it all up and return that as a result. Weird notation. Let's see if it works the same way. So save. It's called a Lambda expression, right? And that's why sometimes lists can be hard to use, because you have to understand a Lambda notation or Lambda functions to understand how they work. Lambda expressions. Let's see if this works. So run. And it may not work the way I want, but let's say generate, and we're good to go, right? So in one line, right, I'm generating numbers that I would do in 3 lines or 4 lines, right? The same kind of effect. But this way, I'm looping through each of the objects inside this. Why is this good? I mean, this is like doing this. Actually, what I'm doing is exactly this, right? Now, you might say this is more complex and is less readable, right? Guys and girls, I'm not going to be upset if you do this on an exam, right? If you don't want to try and use a sum function. Some functions are neat, but you're required to use a Lambda expression, which some people don't understand, right? Again, think about the Lambda expressions as an anonymous function, right? That's taking in a value number and returning it back out. So for what I'm really saying when I see this method is how I read it is this: for every number in numbers, return it. That's what I'm really saying. So for every number in numbers, return the number that I'm looking at. Okay. Let's not use this. I'm just showing you that is possible. I'm going to comment this out, right, to show you the lambda expression equivalent. Lambda expression equivalent. Kind of. Go back to this one. So this satisfies our requirements for this piece. The piece that generates, 4 dice. That's what this does. And this is our generate abilities. And the generate abilities fills us in, and we have our numbers. And if I want to pass this information onto the next form, we can generate a next form by having a next button, right? Taking the numbers and pass them over. Let's do that swap out thing, and then we'll stop. How do I swap it out? I need the ability for me to look at 2 values, right? So column, there are going to be 2 columns, right? I want you to think about it in your mind, right? So I'm going to swap each ability. So if I run this test again, all right? And if I kind of go generate, you can see I'm getting numbers now, right? And if I click onto it, the more I click onto it, you're going to see that I'm going to get different numbers. And let's say I like this one, right? Because I like the way it works, but I want my strength to be 16, right? Because I think I want to make this kind of more of a fighter type. He's going to be more of a warrior, or she's going to be more of a warrior. So I'm going to swap my charisma with my strength. How do I do that, right? Okay, this is more complex, right? Because I have to choose 2 values to swap, right? You might think that the easiest thing would be just to drag and drop, right? For each drag and drop, it takes 3 different operations, believe it or not, which is very, it can be more complex for some people. So let's create another option here, and let's think about how we're gonna do this. So the customer wants us to make it. So imagine I'm the customer, and I want to give the ability for people to swap abilities based on some kind of pull down, like a combo box, right? So I'm gonna have 2 combo boxes. And when I click on one and the other, depending on what I click, I'm gonna be able to swap those 2 abilities around, an ability swap. So let's pull down the toolbox. In our toolbox, we'll drag a container, like a group box. We'll put it next to the ability box up here. There we go. And we'll do the same thing for this one. We'll make it so that it's the same size. So we'll say it's 12. And then Lucida Sans. There we go. And we're going to call this the swap text box, or the swap group box. Swap group box. There we go. And we kind of pull this down and say swap abilities. There we go. So which abilities do you want to swap? It's going to say, right? Which one of these do you want to swap? Okay, that's what I want to say. So which 2 abilities? So you should be able to pull down like strength and whatever, and it should know when I say strength, it means the strength text box, and the something else, whatever you're going to choose, right? All right, let's use some controls for that. So I'm going to say go back to my toolbox, and I want to look at a combo box for this, right? Click my combo box, put it on there. Here's my combo box, right? Now what I want to do is I want to preload these values, right? So this is like first ability combo box. That's what this is going to be. So we're going to say first ability combo box. First ability combo box. And just to be clear, right, what I want this to look like is when I pull this down, I'm going to choose an ability, choose the other one, and then press the swap button, which I don't have yet, but I will. I want to have a swap button that swaps those 2 abilities around, right? And I can do this multiple times. Every time I click the swap button, I can swap another ability, right? An ability swap. All right, so first of all, let's fill this with abilities, right? And we want to be able to do it so that we swap one with the other one. This is more complex. Like I said, we'll start it off and then we'll stop. Okay. Now remember how we named our text boxes, and this is kind of a way of doing things, right? I could name it like this. I could say strength, dexterity, right? Constitution. It's hard to see for me. Intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Okay, there it is. There's my my combo box. And if I run this thing, just to see what it looks like when I run the combo box, it's like a list box, but you pull it down like this. You say, I want, strength, right? And then you choose a strength. That's one I want to swap, right? And then, so that's your first ability, right? And then I just want to swap it with another ability, right? So strength and something else, and then press swap, right? Okay, I want you to think of the functionality first. How can I tell which ability I'm talking about, right? What's the primary one and what's the secondary one that I want? Like, you got to think about like logic. How am I going to do this later on, right? Think about it. What I want to do is I'm going to refer to the text box, right? I'm going to use the sender object for sure, right? The sender object, right? To kind of define what those abilities are, right? So depending on what it is, I want to say, when I choose strength, I really mean the strength text box, right? When I choose intelligence, I mean the intelligence text box. That's what I mean. So when I choose that, I choose which one or the other. All right, so far that's one. And I want to make a label that says kind of like first ability, second ability, right? Because it's like we did before. So I'll pull this down, and we'll put another label across. We're just going to copy one of these. So copy, and in here we'll paste. And we'll call this, instead of dexterity, we'll say first ability text label, first ability label. And then we'll say first ability. And then we'll copy these two things. Again, we can maybe copy them to the side like this, which I kind of like, just to use our space a little more effectively. Copy, and then paste. And we'll put them next to each other like this. And we'll make this second ability combo. This is if you look at the name of this combo box, this is the first ability combo box. We'll just make this the second ability combo box. Now there's many ways to do this. Again, second ability combo box. And this will be the second, this will be the second ability label. So this is first ability label, this will be second ability label. Second ability label. And we'll just kind of call this second ability. Okay, so we got our first ability, and we have our second. It's kind of a little bit tight. Maybe we'll make it a little larger, just so we move these together to the right. There we go. And then I need a swap button, right? Swap button down here. So I'm going to kind of generate another button. So I'm going to go toolbox. I'll go back to my toolbox, grab a button, pull it in here. There's my button. And what I want to do with my button is make it a little larger. So it's kind of the size of one of my buttons here, like this. There we go. And we're going to call this the swap button, ability swap button. Ability, or maybe we'll call this a swap. Just make it easy, swap button. Swap button. This will be called swap. Right? No. So when I click the swap button, I want, depending on what I've chosen here, right, I want to swap stuff. Hey, here's something. I should probably have some default abilities that I want to swap, right? Like, for example, I don't know. You can choose whatever you want. The first one should be strength, and the second one should be intelligence. How do I show a default one? Well, combo box has different forms. I want you to see this for a second, right? So, autocomplete. I've got my autocomplete collection. I could type in the ability if I want. It also has, I'm going to go down here, display member, right? I can choose to display a member in here, right? What I'm displaying. I could set it up so that when I load up, it displays a certain way, right? So maximum drop down items is 8. I only have 6 for these ones because there's only 6 items that we can drop down. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I run this thing again, these are things I can set up in my combo box as options. So 6, now I only get 6, right? Then I can choose 1, and this is how I want it to work. And then click swap, and then these things will swap around, right? Who has some suggestions of how to make the swap work? Anybody? So I'm choosing an ability. I'm referencing an object. When I choose one, I reference one text box. When I choose another, I reference the other text box. Yes, that's nice. However, I'm just going to put it out there to you guys, right? So far, we've been using all the text boxes to hold our values, like physically on the form. You might want to move to doing things behind the scenes with other variables. So before I pause the movie, I'm going to talk about this, right? So we need to be able to think about how this thing will work, right? Well, definitely I want some kind of event that's going to happen with the swap button. So I'm going to double click on the swap button to generate my swap event, right? I don't know what it's going to do yet, but I definitely want to do a couple things. When I click the buttons, I'm going to read what the values are on those buttons. The other thing is that I want default values inside these objects, these buttons, selected from the get-go. So how do I select something, right, in these things? And what do I do? How do I detect that these things are being selected in the first place? Well, again, if I click on this and click on the default options, you can see that there's a selected index changed event for each of these combo boxes, just like there was for the list box. It's very similar to a list box. But the difference for a combo box is I can actually pull down, right, what I want. A list box just lists everything, and I select. This one I pull down which one I want. And it takes up a little bit less room than a list box, right? Okay, so that's kind of the reason why we use this. But it's a little different too. It has other options we're going to talk about. Like, for example, drop-down style. If I look at the list box, I can do a simple drop-down style, right? I can also do a drop-down, right? Or I can do a drop-down list, right? And if I show you this one, and if I press play, here's the drop-down list. So drop-down list, right? And I can't see anything in here at all, right? There isn't a value I don't see in here. I just choose one, and then it becomes the value, and I can't highlight it. I can't type inside of there. Like, it just switches the value to whatever I want, right? So I can't like do anything with it. That's different than this one, where I can actually type it. Like, this is the combo box. That's why it's called the combo box. I can actually type in Dexterity, my own, right? And even if I spell it wrong, it'll take it, right? And that's not probably what I want. I don't probably want that style at all. Those are two styles. And let's look at the other one, this one here. So drop-down style, instead of drop-down, right? If I go simple, here's simple style. Let's look at that one, because there's 3 different styles for a combo box, right? That means I can just choose something like Dexterity, and it'll take it. There is no list at all. Like, it won't even show me the list here, which is bad. So I want this style, which means I wanted a drop-down list. That's what I want it to be. That's the kind of style that I want. So let's change the combo box. Instead of simple, I want a drop-down list, which doesn't allow me to edit what I get. I get whatever I choose is what I get. I also don't want the window color to be the drop-down color. I want it to be white again, just to make sure that it's correct. I'm specifying the back color to be white because I want to make sure that I get white on the background color. So if I run it, I'm going to choose strength as an example, or constitution, and click swap, and then something is going to happen. All right? Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll make the swap functionality work.